For 5 minutes to see if our tape is working.
You do a lot of this, Gordy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, here we are at 107 Court Street in Plattsburgh, only a hoop and a holler from where I work at the Clinton County Government Center, and I never knew until a couple of days ago that this was the home of Dr. A.B. DeGrandpre, a name that's synonymous with all kinds of great things that have happened in Plattsburgh and Clinton County for a long, long time. Calvin and I have been trying to line up this interview for I don't know how long, and we finally caught you.
Oh, very true.
Caught you, Doc.
Yeah.
Thanks for allowing us to come into your home.
Well, I've been hiding most of the time these days, you know.
Well, you know, you were down in Florida all winter long when we did our little retrospective of Physicians Hospital celebrating 75 years this year. But we swore that we were going to try to nail you down the minute you got to town, and you got to town only 9 days ago, right?
That's correct, yeah.
That's great.
I was actually invited to be the honorary chairman, as you may or may not know, of that 75th
Isn't
anniversary.
that wonderful?
But I had committed to go to Florida for 3 months, so I didn't want to break my commitment, you know.
Well, I'm on the foundation at CVPH, and they planned this Diamond Jubilee Ball. And there were, as there always are, a few naysayers. People said, wow, that's a little bit too classy. I don't know if we can fill the place. Well, I want you to know they filled the place in about a week and a half and had to turn some people away. So I guess they just had a great time. So you missed it, and I missed it, too.
Yes, I understand they had over 500 people
Yeah.
there. I've heard nothing but excellent things about it.
I have, too.
It was a full dress affair. The ladies came in their formal evening gowns, and most of the men wore tuxedos. And I understand it was an overwhelming success.
It was terrific. Now, you told me when I walked in here today that you came to Plattsburgh. You weren't born here, were you?
I was born on May 24th, 1909, in the front bedroom of a house at 163 Margaret Street.
Come on, were you really?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Tell me about your parents.
My father was a physician, born in Burlington, Vermont, but actually educated in Canada. My mother was a Canadian, born in Ottawa, Canada, was a Convent Street girl, educated at the Rideau Street Convent in Ottawa. My mother had 5 brothers, and she was the only girl in the family. And all are deceased, of course, now, with only one remaining cousin. My father, as I said, born in Burlington, but educated in Canada, met my mother, of course, in Canada. They were married in Canada, and then moved to Peru, New York, where he was a family doctor for several years, and came to Plattsburgh in 1909 and settled at 163 Margaret Street, where I was born and brought up, and then after 30 years finally moved next door.
What's down there now?
Down there now is Northern Insurance.
Oh, that's
Northern Insurance.
right on the same spot.
And it's exactly the same spot. Yeah.
Northern Insurance has actually been in this community for a long time.
Yeah, it started by Glenn Giltz
Yep.
from Ausable Forks. And then wanted to move to Margaret Street, and I owned the double house at 165, 167 Margaret Street, and later 171. And so they combined those 3 properties and made the building that they now have down there now, which is quite representative, I think, of Margaret Street.
You know, Calvin and I enjoy going around and just filming the things the way they are now, and then finding old photographs to see what was in that spot a while ago. We have a good friend, Ron Venn, on Bailey Avenue, who has almost made a career for the last 5 years of finding the old photographs first, and then standing on exactly the same spot and taking a photograph today.
Mm-hmm.
It pleases me to see that some of the old houses and buildings are still around, but many of them are gone, especially in this neighborhood. I can't believe this house has survived.
Well, it has. The neighborhood sort of has deteriorated a little bit with all the college housing that's here. On the east side was Bill Levy's home.
Oh, yeah.
Bill Levy, having passed away a couple of years ago, a wonderful old traditional home. On my left, at the corner of William and Court Street, was the Emerson Sachs home. Emerson Sachs was, I believe, a banker here in town, well known. The Goldman House was the next house west. The Physicians Hospital was directly, the original Physicians Hospital was directly across the street from the Goldman House.
I had forgotten that.
It's now a large apartment house.
Oh, yes. That's part of the history, and I had forgotten that completely.
Owned by Mr. Barber, Charlie Barber, I believe
Yeah.
now. But that was the original Physicians Hospital. Further down the street was the home of Dr. and Mrs. Silver. Dr. Silver, of course, being the first chief of surgery at the new Physicians Hospital when it moved to off Beekman Street. Yeah.
This, I must confess, I've been up and down this street literally thousands of times and never looked back to this beautiful home that you have here. And you've been here since 1961, but it sits just far enough back that it's a little bit isolated, and that's kind of neat, isn't it?
Well, it is. Yeah, we have a little privacy here. We have a little extra lot on the west side, and my son Art, who's now retiring from, who has retired from public school service and is now retiring from Seton, where he's been teaching mathematics for the last 4 or 5 years, takes care of all the exterior and really most of the interior of this house. He does a lot of gardening and does some nice landscaping, and also does the shoveling during the wintertime when I'm fortunate enough to be away.
The architecture of this house is what, Spanish?
Spanish, right. The house was originally conceived by a man by the name of McDougall, Alvin McDougall, who saw a similar home on Long Island and sent some architects down to Long Island and had a copy of this house made on this property.
So you mean somewhere there might be a house that's pretty close to that one on Long Island?
Well, if it survives as long as it's done pretty well. Because this house has, as I told you earlier, has the original roof and the original stucco on it.
Since 1915?
Since 1915, yeah.
Now, isn't that hard to believe?
Well, it is hard to believe. Built by a family by the name of Light. I should remember there was a large number of men in the family. They were mostly carpenters, and they did basically all the work in the construction of this home.
Well, that's nice. You've been here, you've been in this house as long as I've been in Plattsburgh, because I came here in 1961, and so I guess you would say I've got my roots down here, but your roots are way, way deeper than mine.
Well, as I say, I was born at 163 Margaret Street, and then after 30 years moved next door to 167, which was a double home owned by people by the name of different people by the name of Ryan. Andrew Ryan was a Supreme Court judge, was brought up at 167 along with his brothers, Steve. Dr. Frank Ryan was a physician, general surgeon here in town. So it's got interesting history. Yeah.
This whole town has great history, and that's why we love to sit down and talk to people like you and just get those memories. Now, your dad was a physician. I didn't know that until you told me today. Was this something you always knew you were going to do?
No, I don't think I had any special vocation to become a physician. It just seemed to naturally flow because I had one brother who was 12 years older than I, Dr. Gerard DeGrandpre, and my father being a physician, I being a physician, graduating at the beginning of the Depression. It seemed nothing better to do at the time than to become a physician.
It seemed like a good idea at the time.
Following their footsteps. Yeah.
So you went to Plattsburgh schools.
I went to St. John's, graduated in 1924 from St. John's High School. St. John's having been started in 1919, so I was in the second graduating class. Graduated in 1924, then went to St. Michael's for 2 years. I was only 15 years of age when I graduated from St. John's. My mother and father thought I was too young to go very far.
Isn't 15 years of age?
Yeah.
Precocious young guy, weren't you?
I don't know how precocious I was. I must tell you that we had a school teacher that lived with our family, and she coached me, and so that I skipped. I shouldn't say I skipped, but I only spent half a year in the first 6 years of schooling, and then spent a full year in the 7th year and flunked the 8th grade.
Oh, what a story.
And then I got out of high school in 3.5 years, went to St. Michael's for 2 years, then to Georgetown, where I graduated in 1928. Then on to Georgetown Medical School, graduating from there in 1932. Then took a internship at the Albany General Hospital, partial residency at the General Hospital, then took a preceptorship here with an old Scotch doctor by the name of MacDonald, R.S. MacDonald, and I stayed with him for 5 years until 1938. And he had a large general surgical practice. I left him in 1938 because I felt that I had learned about as much as I could from him, started on my own, and he had died precipitously, suddenly up in the fishing camp in 1939, and I suddenly inherited all his practice. And I was overwhelmed with...
Were you really?
Overwhelmed with patients, yes. So my brother, who was 12 years older than I and had a fine practice up in Tupper Lake, New York, came down to help me. Quite a reversal, an older brother coming to help a younger brother. But we got along fine. Then the war, of course, came along on December 7th, 1941. He was in the Naval Reserves and was called in immediately, and I volunteered in the following year.
Well, we're going to talk a lot about that, but let's back up a little bit to the start of the new Physicians Hospital and Dr. Silver, whom you knew.
I knew Dr. Silver very well. Dr. Ralston was his assistant. He was a friend of a W.H. Minor. Mrs. Minor and Mrs. Silver apparently were very compatible, very congenial with each other. And the story goes, that I can't verify, but everybody accepts it, I believe, that they went out on a Sunday afternoon.
That's the story.
Went for a ride. Mr. Minor suggested maybe the building of a new hospital and wanted to know where Mrs. Silver would like to have it constructed. She picked a tree up near where it is at the present time, and that's where the Physicians Hospital was constructed.
And the rest, as they say, is history. And we'll learn a lot more history as soon as we stop our tape for a moment to make sure we're actually recording something. And we'll be right back with Dr. A.B. DeGrandpre. So, January 1st, 1926, it opened.
Correct. I can well remember, of course, the construction going on. I can remember Mr. Minor putting in certain doors, let us say, not being happy with them, having all the doors taken out, reconstructing doors. Same way with flooring.
Really?
Putting
I didn't know this.
Putting flooring in, not being happy with that, taking out the flooring. It spared no expense, in other words, in the construction of that hospital. Had large amphitheaters up on the upper levels. Had hopes of bringing the Mayo brothers from Rochester, Minnesota here.
Come on. I didn't know that either.
Consulted them. They, of course, were happy and successful in Rochester and decided not to leave Rochester for a little town like Plattsburgh. He had summer courses, had surgeons come in, do some surgery, give lectures in these amphitheaters where we would sit in the tiered areas and observe what was going on. I went there several times to watch what was conspiring, what was going on. Very interesting.
Did you ever dream there would be that kind of facility when you first started doctoring in this town?
Well, of course, I knew the facility was there because, well, no, you're correct in that this was right, because I was here in the 20s, of course, and started in the 30s to practice. But when I started to practice, of course, the building was there.
I see. Okay.
The building was there.
I was 17 when...
Yeah, I'm talking about...
That's right, too. You were a teenager.
Yeah, that's right. See, I'm talking about the 19...
You seem so timeless to me.
Well, I am. I don't know why I'm still here. Really.
We'll have to talk about the Revolutionary War after a while. But so it was pretty nice when you finally went over there to work. It was still a beautiful place.
It was wonderful, although my primary affiliation was with the other hospital, the Champlain Valley Hospital. That, as you know, was here since maybe, 1910 or 1912. That was the original hospital. There was some disagreements among the medical staff. They wanted to leave the Champlain Valley Hospital and start a hospital of their own, which they did under the aegis of Dr. Silver. So that was the hospital that started here on Court Street. And then, of course, the two hospitals were in competition for years, Champlain Valley and the Physicians Hospital, Physicians being a private hospital and the Champlain Valley being a community hospital run by the Grey Nuns of the Sacred Heart. Yeah. But that's where I did most of my surgery, at the Champlain Valley Hospital.
What kind of feelings do you get when you drive up Ruger Street now and look over at the remnants of what's left of that hospital?
Brings back a lot of emotion.
Does it?
It really does, yeah. Because I had just wonderful years there. Yeah. Mr. Withall wanted me to be the chief surgeon at the Physicians Hospital, but I had such affection for the nuns in the Champlain Valley and did so well over there that I decided to keep my roots over there at the Champlain Valley.
Well, what happened after the two merged and it
Well, they
became
merged.
CVPH Medical Center?
They merged, and then because many of the community felt there was a duplication of services by having two hospitals, and they thought it would serve the community better to have just the one large so-called medical center. So the Jim Fitzpatrick was active with the Physicians Hospital. There were many people on the board. Mr. Will Howell and others were on the board of the Physicians Champlain Valley Hospital. But they decided to get rid of the respective superintendents of each hospital. Mr. McLaughlin at the Physicians, Jerry Stewart at the Champlain Valley, and get a new superintendent who called himself then the president of the staff. That was Howard Reed, I think, the first man. Roach was very active with the Champlain Valley Hospital. That's about it. They decided, as I say, to get together and start a whole new ball game going, you know.
How many other retired physicians are there who've been practicing as long as you are in this area? Do you know of any?
None. I don't think none. My contemporaries almost all died in their late 60s or 70s. I don't know why I've survived so long.
What's the magic? Do you have any idea?
I have no.
Good genes.
I have no idea.
Good humor.
My mother died at 72, diabetes, and some major abdominal catastrophe. I don't know what it was, whether it was a ruptured aneurysm or pancreatitis, but it doesn't make any difference. Nobody wanted to operate on her. My father was an inveterate Camel smoker. Smoked 3 packs of Camel cigarettes every day of his life, excepting during Lent.
Can you imagine?
He gave up.
Can you imagine?
The first Ash Wednesday, he gave up smoking, and Easter Sunday he had his carton of Camels there all ready to go. Yeah.
Isn't that what a story? Because, you know, I've told people on this program, I've told my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that when I started smoking, and I haven't smoked since 1975, there were ads in Life magazine which said, doctors say Chesterfields, are good for you, good for digestion.
Sure. That's
Isn't
right.
that amazing?
Yeah,
You
that's
certainly have come a long ways in that respect.
That's certainly for true. Yeah, that's the truth.
So your dad lived till
Lived to be
what?
78. And he died, I'm sure, as a result of all his smoking. He had very severe hardening of the arteries. Finally lost a leg and died in the Champlain Valley Hospital following an amputation of a leg.
Well, that's pretty amazing to make it to 78 with 3 packs of Camels every day
He
of his
did it,
life.
I say, excepting Lent.
Maybe it's the giving up at cigarettes at Lent that made him last that long. Well, when we interviewed the other doctors, it was interesting for us to look back in time and see how doctoring has changed down through the years. And that must be a source of wonder and puzzlement for you to see all the great advantages today.
Well, it is, because when I treated patients many years ago originally, it was all sort of symptom treatment. If you had a backache, you got a pill for your back. If you had a stomach ache, you got a pill for your stomach. If you had a headache, you got something else. Simple surgery was done compared with what it is now. But we never dared attack the lungs, for instance, or the blood vessels, or the heart. I just came back from Florida. The woman that does the cleaning for me had her intestine resected perhaps 5 weeks before I came back. 2 days following the operation, she was told she had a hole in her heart that had to be repaired. She'd had it since birth, but it had never been discovered. So she went back in the hospital, and in 4 days she was back cleaning apartments again. Unbelievable.
That's got to be good to watch that kind of
Well,
progress.
it is. It certainly is.
Because as a young doctor, you did what you could, and
Did the best you could.
you did the best you could.
Nobody
But
was sued. The old doc did the best he could. He tried as hard as he could to help you, you know.
well, physicians and priests and teachers were
They were respected.
were tremendously respected in the community, and that respect hasn't always persisted, has it?
No, doctors were next to the priests or ministers,
Sure.
as far as respect was concerned. No longer that way at all. Doctors are fair game now.
Yeah, I admire people who get into that business now for those reasons. It's possible with modern medicine and with the great learning we have to save a lot of lives that couldn't be saved when you were a young physician, but always that threat of somebody suing
Many have left now because of this.
because of that very
Because of this.
reason.
The seventh page of the GTE phone book in Florida now is covered with an ad, and there's a list of targets, people who are subject to lawsuit now. I believe it starts with architects and anesthesiologists. It has a list of 25 or 30 people. There's another list of reasons for suing people, and to me this is terrible, you know, ethically, morally, in every other way. Yeah.
But how many of those years would you trade?
Oh, I practiced during the golden years, and I would never want to go through this stuff again. Practice of medicine and surgery is so complicated now. Complicated in getting patients into the hospital. Some secretary will authorize your admitting a patient to the hospital. I couldn't stand this. Anesthesia. I had my own anesthesiologist for years
Really?
at my beck and call. And now of course, there are large groups. And you have to go through channels, you know, to get a patient admitted to the hospital. And then you have certain hours when you can practice your surgery. Certain hours are blocked off in the operating room for you, and you better keep those hours occupied. Otherwise, you'll lose your spot.
What was the anesthesia for you for most of those years? Ether?
Ether.
I'll never. Have you ever had ether, Calvin?
I was 4 years old.
I will never forget that experience as long as I live. The drug culture wasn't invented when I was a kid, but I learned a taste of what it was like to go on a trip when I had my tonsils out.
It was ether, chloroform for pregnant women.
Was it really?
Oh, yes. Chloroform was a very dangerous anesthetic,
Oh, my, yes.
but seemed to be safe for women who were giving birth. Nitrous oxide came into effect when I was practicing. Ethylene, nitrous oxide being laughing gas, so-called laughing gas. Good for dental work, good for minor work. But by far, and then sodium pentothal came in towards the end. But that was very crudely administered initially.
Was it really?
Oh, by itself, it is not a muscle relaxant. You need something to supplement it to get good muscular relaxation, which you need for, let us say, particularly for abdominal surgery. So it's good to initiate anesthesia in that you don't have the nausea and the vomiting that goes along with ether. But it was not understood during the initial phase when it was given here. Dr. LeDoux Sr. gave probably 1,500 or 2,000 sodium pentothal
Wow.
anesthetics during his days. Yeah.
Well, that's the beauty of living to a ripe old age, and we know you're going to be around for at least another 20 years. But you have... But what I think one of the reasons you're still here is because you find a lot of things that give you a laugh.
Well,
Don't you think that good humor is really a big part of
Extremely
it?
important. And there's so much being said now about mind over matter, that the importance of having a good attitude and about things, about life in general, you know? Yeah.
You can't. I mean, I hate to philosophize here, But I mean, I don't see how people can always look for the dark side. I look for the other side.
That's the way to go through life, Gordy, for
The only
sure.
way I can get up in the morning is to look at something bright.
Yeah, that's the only way to succeed and be happy.
Yeah.
And I really feel, I'm not overly religious, but I feel that there's some supernatural being that's kept me around because I've had so many close calls, particularly during the war. There are 40 or 50 or 60 times that I should have been not around any longer, you know.
It's a point that's very well taken, and one that we espouse very often on this program, called Our Little Corner. Somebody up there runs the show. Yeah, we're very aware of that.
There's no question about it. I was scheduled to take a airplane ride in North Africa, in Uja, North Africa, on this particular plane, and as the plane came in, it suddenly caught fire, and out came a photographer in his underwear, and the plane just disintegrated.
Oh, my.
And I would have gone up next in that plane. At Anzio, which was one of the hottest spots in the Second World War, a German fighter plane came over and dropped 7 bombs right on our hospital. And had I been in the operating room where I should have been, I would have been killed immediately because our head nurse, assistant head nurse, 7 or 8 of our doctors, many of our patients were killed during this attack. I fortunately was home reading mail. My good wife wrote me a letter every day during the war. And many other instances took place, too numerous to enumerate now. But
I still want to talk about the war experience. First of all, what year? Did you enlist?
I enlisted. We had a recruiting officer come up here at the Physicians Hospital, told us the importance of enlisting, that we would all be drafted if we didn't enlist. So I enlisted.
That was the line.
I enlisted in the spring of 1942 and wasn't called up until September of 1942, 4 days after the birth of my son Bern, who was born on September the 9th, 1942, and I was called in on the 13th of September.
Oh.
So my wife was still in the hospital when I took off.
Oh, my.
And we had that would be
Talk
the 4th.
about mixed feelings.
That's exactly right, yeah.
You had how many by then?
That would have been our 4th child. So then we had an interlude of 3 years while I was away. Then we had 4 more children. Yeah. Yeah. She had a rest for 3 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that service experience. 1942, and where did you do your basic training?
At Camp Grant, Rockford, Illinois.
Oh, my.
Yeah. Went out there for basic training, and then we were called down to Camp Campbell, Kentucky. Brand new institution. It was so new that our commanding officer at Camp Grant had no idea where it was, had to call the War Department to find out where it was. And we sloshed around in all that Kentucky mud, clay, you know. And then I was in a dispensary it was called a General Service Engineer with a General Service Engineer Regiment. And fortunately, that was September. In October, I was accepted into the American College of Surgeons. And that automatically gave me a promotion and made me eligible to go into a hospital, which I desperately wanted to do. And a Dr. Thaxton from South Carolina, he was the head of urology in South Carolina, picked me. He liked Georgetown graduates. So he picked 6 or 7.
Interesting how that works.
6 or 7 Georgetown graduates to join this fledgling hospital. And that was set up at Camp Breckenridge, Tennessee. So we were over there, and immediately we were told that we were headed for overseas. So we were there perhaps a month, and then we were gotten together and headed for overseas. We did our staging up at Camp Shanks, which is upstate New York.
I don't remember. Where
It's
was
up in
that?
Westchester, Camp
Oh.
Shanks. And we were there and got our shots and knew how to shoot a pistol, and then we headed for the Staten Island ferry, and that took us out to a boat called the Mariposa, which was the queen of the Southern Pacific Steamship Line. And we zigzagged across the Atlantic 6 days and landed at Casablanca, North Africa.
Wow.
Now that was the month of March 1943, and there were 500 ships sunk that month. most of them in convoy. But we landed uneventfully in Casablanca. The North African invasion took place the previous November. Wayne Byrne from Plattsburgh was in on that initial invasion of North Africa. But we had no problem. We landed at Casablanca, stayed there about 6 weeks, and then we went by 48, that's the 40 and 8 old French cattle car, to Oujda, North Africa, which is on the Algerian-Moroccan border. And we were there and we trained and took care of the casualties of the 82nd Airborne Division while they were in training, which was a very interesting experience.
Tell me about it. I just wondered how it had to be horrendous at times.
Well, the most horrendous thing that happened was basically this. The Sultan of Morocco was supposed to come and inspect a practice jump at 10 o'clock in the morning. He overslept. An African sirocco occurred, sirocco being a very violent windstorm. And he arrived around noon, and we had the jump anyway, right during the middle of the storm, and we had over 100 casualties, just in the practice jump.
Oh,
broken necks, broken backs, broken heels. I can't tell you the tragedy of that. That was a bad thing that happened. Of course, the 82nd Airborne became famous during the Second World War.
Did.
Yeah. General Gavin was in charge. At that time, General Ridgway took over later on. Yeah.
Very familiar name. So where to after that?
Then we went from Oujda, we went to Mers el Kabir, which is in the outskirts of Oran. And we set up there and we took care of a lot of the casualties coming back from Sicily. The invasion of Sicily was going on at this point. And then in September of that year, we made the initial landing at Salerno. That was the initial landing on the mainland of Europe. And I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to go right in with the troops on D-Day. And we stayed right in foxholes for 2 or 3 days until we got our equipment together and then started operating. I'll never forget the first night we were set up. We must have had 1,000 casualties right outside, laying out right outside our hospital. And we had to go out with flashlights and pick out the ones that had salvageable situations, you know. Yeah. A very interesting thing happened, if you want me to go on.
I do, of course I do.
On the 5th night at Salerno, we were scheduled to be captured. The British were on our north. We were just south of a river called the Sealy River. The Germans had come right down and separated the two parts of our invasion group. Our colonel came in and lay down right by my operating tent, my operating table, and said, "We're going to be captured tonight. I've got my eagles on, so I want to be sure when I'm captured they're going to give me special care." The 82nd Airborne Division came in and dropped, elements of it dropped right on our hospital. We had cruisers, and I think we might have had a battleship or two, and they shot their big guns at the Germans. All our people, cooks, were given guns to go to the front to try and salvage the front. The next morning, the resistance we had put up had been successful, so that the Germans retreated, so we were safe. Our hospital tents were mostly down. This is interesting. The combat parachutes are all over our area, and within a week, every young Italian girl was wearing a parachute as a new dress. Nylon, you know?
Very nice. It was nylon.
Nylon, yeah.
Silk at first, and then nylon.
It was green and black, the combat parachute.
Were they really green and black?
Green and
I
black.
had forgotten that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's a great story.
Yeah.
That's one that I had not known before, but I can picture it.
Well, that's in the little book that I...
Well, let's talk about the little book. I'm going to reach down here for it. I had known you wrote this book, and you were kind enough to autograph a copy called My Reflections, Memories of a Lifetime. Arthur Batterton DeGrandpre, and that's the first time I knew what the B stood for. And you told me why that was your mother's maiden name?
My mother's maiden name, Batterton, yeah. She was Alexandra Batterton. That was her name.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Unusual name.
Well,
yeah.
Your experience precipitated this book, obviously. Is it all about your war experience?
It's about many things. It's about family, medical practice, the war, and a lot of incidental little individual stories that came to mind, you know. Yeah.
When did you start it?
under the aegis of Helen McLeod, she wanted me to write some stories about the war. She knew that I was in on three different invasions: invasion at Salerno, D-Day with the troops at Anzio, and D-Day with the invasion of southern France. And she knew about it, and so I wrote initial stories particularly about those three invasions. But then it expanded into other facets.
We should tell our younger viewers that Helen McLeod worked for a long time for the Press Republican, was a good friend of yours and mine, and that's where it started.
I think she was probably the Sunday editor.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where it started for you,
That's
and you
where it
started to
started.
get your thoughts on paper.
Right.
Hadn't your family pressured you to get some of these things down for posterity?
Actually, no. My niece, Sandy, is a retired school teacher in Glens Falls, New York. She would be the youngest daughter of my brother Gerard, and she was after me for do something like this, and she did the original work on it, but it needed to be revised so much and corrected so much that I finally got Herb Carpenter and his wife to do it, and Mrs. Carpenter took a look at the original and said this is really a daunting task, and she spent maybe a month or 6 weeks, and she did a very good job. So there are only one or two very small typographical errors in it.
That's pretty amazing. So all told, how long did you spend? Now, what year would this be when you started collecting this information, putting it down on paper?
Well, the whole thing started around 1989 or 1990. By the time I retired, I practiced for 56 years here,
That's
general surgery.
what a wonderful milestone.
Yeah.
That's great.
And so I retired in 1989, and shortly thereafter, Helen McLeod, got after me to do something about this.
So you spent quite a long time on it.
So I've written about 100 stories now in all. I'm not comparable with you, who writes every week, but
But
once a month was enough.
To put these columns in the paper, they're just
It's
the
a
only
daunting task.
but the only word I can use to describe what you write is delicious.
Well.
Because that's what life has been for you.
Well, it has been. I've been very, very fortunate. And I'm extremely fortunate to have 8 wonderful children, 7 of whom live right here in this area. And as I say jokingly but truthfully, the last time I had dinner at home was April 24th of last year.
Isn't that great?
It's true.
But where would we be without family?
I know, yeah. But I have a very devoted family.
Wonderful.
I have the 8 kids, 4 boys, 4 girls. I used to say, being a doctor, I got the boys to be older than the girls, which, of course, is a falsehood.
And boy, do they mother hen you. They were clinging to you when I walked in the door this morning.
They're this way every day.
Isn't it great?
There are 7 that live in the area, so every evening, see, my evenings are all occupied. Somebody takes pity on me every night.
It's nice when you get older when somebody takes pity on you. I just want to show people a little bit about the inside of this book here. First of all, what it looks like. Let me take the cover off. Now tell me about this picture.
That was done by an artist somewhere in France. It's a charcoal. It took him about 10 minutes to do that.
Come on.
Yes, that's about all. He was
Captured it. You haven't changed a bit.
That's a laugh.
What year would this be? 43,
Is that
40?
a lie or an untrue?
Somewhere in the middle. Would this be about 44, maybe?
Probably in 44, yes. That's when it would be, 1944.
Just somebody you met.
Yeah, and it was with the USO. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? Now, you are there a lot of photographs in the
There are
book?
quite a few photographs. Yeah, that's probably the best quality. Yeah. That was an interview.
This was, here's the dedication.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But there are a lot of interesting photographs in there. There's one of Eisenhower coming out of our operating tent at Ujda, and you can see him, he's kind of wiping his brow because it was about 120 degrees.
Oh, my.
And I can tell you I voted for him because, when he ran for president, because he said, I'm going to send my engineers here and we'll cool that operating tent off for you. And they came and they put up some towers filled with water, cold water, and the water drained over our tent all the rest of the time we were in Ujda.
And it worked?
And it worked fine, but the
Isn't that
temperature
amazing?
about 75 or 80.
Yankee ingenuity?
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that delicious? Well, let me just look through here. And as I'm looking, oh, come on. Look at this.
What's that?
I love it.
That's the way it was.
Oh,
Yeah.
isn't it amazing how they dressed us when we were kids?
You won't believe this, but I had my first pair of long pants as I graduated from high school. I never had a pair of long pants until I got out of high school. It was a gray flannel pants. I still remember.
I can remember wool, as my mother would call them, woolen knickers, and that was the most detestable wearing apparel I've ever had on in my lifetime. And I've told lots of stories before about taking my little jackknife, and every little boy had a jackknife, and cutting those rubbers. Those knickers would eat into my legs because I had fat legs even as a little kid.
Yeah.
It's amazing, huh? Oh, that's a great. That picture was probably taken right here in
It
Plattsburgh.
was, for sure.
Oh, that's great. So you start right at the beginning, don't you? My grandfather.
Well, that's something written by one of my grandsons, Vincent Delio.
Oh, about you.
About me, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He interviewed me many, many years ago, and that was the result of the interview. Right.
Oh, that's great. Well, I just want to glance through. I don't want to show people everything about the book, but I want to titillate them so they'll go out and buy another 200 copies.
I have to get more made because I don't have too many left.
Oh, my. I see the wedding day, 1936,
That was January the 11th, 1936.
the year before I was born. And with Jeannie on Delray Beach.
That's Delray Beach. We went to Bermuda on our honeymoon, but this was taken several months later at Delray Beach. We vacationed
1942. These are old photographs, so people don't expect the quality to be
That's right.
akin to what we have today,
Yeah.
but they're still memories.
They're of interest and great, very memorable, yes, indeed.
How many photographs would you say you have over the years?
Oh,
Thousands? and
probably thousands.
With a big family.
in the other room, I have a lot of things that were taken, put together for my 90th birthday.
Oh,
And
really?
before you go, you might take a look at those.
Well, we're going to take a look at everything you'll show us. Did you get into the movie taking, home movies fairly early?
Very minimally. The 8mm movies, we took some of those when our children were young. We have a very interesting one, I don't know where it is now, of giving Johnny and Art, my two oldest boys, boxing gloves for Christmas.
Oh,
And of
no.
course they wanted their pictures taken. It was sparring, but of course the sparring ended up into a real fight.
Of course, they were beating on each other.
Exactly. So that would be some of the most humorous of the
Well, there were some
home movies that we
There
had.
was some pretty good amateur and even professional boxing going on in those days around Plattsburgh. It doesn't exist that much anymore, except in Golden Gloves across the lake in Burlington. There were a few people getting into boxing, but boy, in the 40s and 50s, there was a lot of boxing
Very popular.
going on here.
Yeah.
Even on the base back in those days.
Yeah. We had a little friend of, I think it was my son Burns, his name was Popcorn Smallcomb.
Come on.
And he won an amateur championship in the area. And then Byrne was invited to go up to his home to spend the evening and have dinner and spend the night. And he found out he was only one of 6 sleeping in the same bed. So he said he didn't want to lose his friendship with Popcorn, but he'd never spend the night there again.
Oh, that's wonderful.
He said he'd never spend the night again.
There were a lot of good boxing matches at the old Bailey Avenue Fairgrounds.
Right. Yeah, I remember those.
A lot of great fun. Well,
Julius LaRue was a boxer.
oh yes, I remember that name very well.
He drove a taxi cab in town, lived next door to me on Margaret Street.
Oh, he did?
And he was, but let's see, he was a wrestler, wasn't he? He was wrestling.
Yep.
He was wrestling. He was a wrestler.
Oh, the 95th
That's it.
Hospital Assembly in North Africa that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I'll try not to get my fingers in it as I hold the book up here.
Now we won 8 battle stars. I don't think any hospital in the whole of the Second World War won as many battle stars as we did. We had an arrowhead and three battle stars for 8 different campaigns we were in.
Well, explain to me what that means.
Well, it's we moved 28 times, but apparently the War Department felt that we were distinguished enough to win a battle star. For instance, on the invasion of Anzio, we got a battle star. On the invasion of Salerno, and the invasion of southern France, we were early going into Germany across the Rhine River, and periodically we'd be issued a battle star.
Well, Do those memories still, I won't say haunt you, but do they still appear in your dreams and your reveries?
Not particularly, not anymore. I kept a good diary during the war.
Oh, you did?
Yes,
like
I
a
did.
Journal?
Yes, I did.
Daily?
No, well, it couldn't be daily because we were so busy some of the time. But whenever we had a lax period, I would certainly write a few notes. So that's helped me very much when writing the book and writing the war stories, you know.
I just wondered because, you know, with the experiences you've mentioned and many more that you haven't mentioned, there's a lot of pathos involved there, and you have to be made out of something special to assimilate that and accommodate all that horror.
Well, being a physician, of course, I'm used to life and death, you know, and so it didn't bother me as much as I'm sure it would some lay people to see all the things that went on, you know.
But I'll bet you at night,
Well, I do.
as you laid in
I
your...
don't sleep very well, but I'm not sure that's the reason that I don't
Well,
sleep well.
I imagine at night back then, as you laid in your cot, you must have said, I wish I could have saved that young guy's life.
There's no question about that. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. And, of course, in the type of hospital I was in called an evacuation, or MASH hospital as it's now called, we only kept patients an average of 10 days, so we wouldn't know the eventual outcome of some of these people. Now, Tom Brokaw writes about the, I think it was the 441st Hawaiian Regiment that fought so valiantly in Italy. And we took care of a lot of those people.
You did.
But, of course, how would you know? You know what happened. There was a period of 6 months or maybe a year even when I did all the neurosurgery. And I am not a neurosurgeon, but I was the only one that would tackle this in our hospital. And the neurosurgery, of course, in wartime is really not neurosurgery. It's general surgery of the brain, in that you remove shell fragments, bullets, pieces of clothing, stopping bleeding. And
Of course, it would have to be a lot of head trauma, wouldn't it?
absolutely. And we keep those people 10 days and then refer them to general hospitals in the rear. So, of course, we never knew the outcome. All we knew is we got the general surgical part of it done, you know, the stopped the bleeding, for instance, and got the shell fragments out and cleaned the wounds up, you know.
Thank goodness for people like you and like Tom Brokaw with his high profile, because his book has sold very well. And I imagine that's been a source of frustration for you over the years. I know you've told your stories many times in this general area, but frustration because the whole story doesn't always get told.
Very true. In fact, I've written to Tom Brokaw.
Have you really?
Yeah, I just
and he
heard
responded?
a very brief response. But he made several errors in his first book.
Here we go. No
For
kidding.
instance, the number of nurses that were killed in certain parts of the war. He's got one article there, and it's well written, but it's a mistake. For instance, it describes a shell going through our operating tent, and it was actually, these were bombs that were dropped rather than, you know, and the number of victims were a little bit different. Nothing of any great importance. And he's made a great contribution, of course. As you know, he's written another book.
Yes. Well, you know, the story is different depending on who tells it, because your observations are different from mine, and that's true of a lot of these incidents. These stories, so your eyes would be far different from the from somebody else.
There, so I'm not exaggerating.
No,
you know what I know went on. You know.
Well, let me see. What other things haven't we mentioned? I know you have so many great stories in the book. What other stories come to mind about the war?
Well, I mean, I've got so many things, Gordy. I could be here all day long and all week long.
See, we would do that, but I know we have other things to do.
Oh, no.
But there is I've mentioned to several of my friends that we were so fortunate to be able to visit the new National D-Day Memorial Museum in New Orleans that just opened last summer in June. And I would urge anyone who goes to New Orleans, of course you want to see the French Quarter and you want to see Bourbon Street and all the other things that New Orleans is famous for. But that museum, especially if you haven't heard these stories before, could change your life. I was so impacted by my visit there. It takes 3 or 4 hours to go through it because they've got everything you can imagine. And talk about memories for my wife and I, because she lost her favorite brother in Africa. as a young guy and a runner and an interpreter, and he had been wounded slightly, was patched up, maybe by you,
Who knows?
who knows, and went back in the field, and then he caught a shell, and that ended his life. And his parents both woke up in the middle of the night, and they knew that Junior, as he was called, was gone. It's amazing connections parents have with their kids.
Premonition, eh?
But so walking through and looking, now you were a little older. When you were in Africa, you were how old, 20?
Well, I was born in 1809, and I was there in
Yeah.
1943. See, Salerno was September the 7th or 8th of 1943. So I was, 7 or 8 or 9 years older than the enlisted man or the young officer.
But there were, you look at those faces, and they have blown up literally hundreds of photographs, group photographs of people everywhere on the beaches and everywhere. And you see those young 17 and 18-year-old faces, and that's what gets to me today.
Sure, of course it does. And it's the same way today. I mean, the young enlisted people who are fighting, not fighting today, but who are in the service, the young airmen, for instance, the young pilots, they're all 19 or 20 years of age, and of course they're filled with zeal and enthusiasm, and they're very full of patriotism.
Yep. So when
Is
did
this all about the Second World War, this New Orleans Museum?
Yes, it is.
Second
It's
World
all
War.
about D-Day.
Uh-huh.
It's all about D-Day.
Normandy.
Yep.
See, I wasn't at Normandy. I missed
No.
Normandy. I missed Omaha Beach, thank goodness.
But there are still a lot of people in this area who were there.
Oh, certainly. I have friends in Florida who were at Omaha Beach
Yep.
and survived the scaling, the high cliff that was there.
So when did the war experience end for you?
Well, I had 4 children, 27 months overseas, 8 battle stars. So I had 120-some points. So I came home with the colonels and the generals. I was let out early.
People don't understand, I guess a lot of the young people don't understand how those points
We were
work.
set out on a point system. So we were sent to Paris for a couple of days and slept on the shelf of a department store, I remember. And
Did you really?
Right, yeah. And then got on a plane at Orly and went to Santa Maria Airfield in the Azores. And there was so much in the way of headwind that they had to leave some of the people off. Now, I was a major, probably the lowest ranking individual on the plane. There was no seat for me. I sat on the floor of the plane.
Did you really?
I didn't have a seat.
Nobody said fasten your seatbelt.
I didn't have a chance to. They were all lieutenant colonels, and generals, that came home that early. But I was distraught when I heard that some of the people were going to have to be left off the plane because they were overloaded, like the overscheduling of planes now. And fortunately, they did it from the Z's backwards. My name being starting with the D, I was safe, So we got back and got to the Bermuda, then went to Wilmington, then went back to Dix, and got discharged at Camp Dix.
People don't, once again, young people today don't realize how your life can be changed in many ways by as brief an experience as your war experience was. But in that period of time, you probably feared for your life and the lives of friends over and over again. You can't help but be profoundly changed forever.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. Everything changes. And it's changed, as you say, it's changed for the rest of your life. I felt terrible about abandoning my family, with a child 4 days old in the hospital. Yeah, but my wife was very dutiful, and so I say she wrote me these little V-mails, those little miniature forms, in which correspondence was carried.
There's another phrase that hasn't been in the daily vocabulary vernacular for a long time, but V-mails and even I've seen the little discs that were recorded that people would go in a little booth somewhere and record that little soft discs and send them back as part of the V-mail.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I didn't see that, but we had a lot of V-mail. And if I hadn't been reading V-mail at Anzio, I certainly would not be here to talk to you this morning.
Isn't that's incredible? And the mail took a while back in those days, communications being what they were compared to today.
Right.
Today it would be a little email.
Yeah. I sent home a German Stein, which just hangs up there on the wall.
Let me see if we can take a look at it. Oh, wait.
And you can see right through the bottom of it. It's an artillery scene. If you point it towards the light.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. Can you see it?
You have got to be kidding. I'm not sure that the camera can capture that.
Turn it more.
This way?
Down.
Yeah.
No. Oh, wait.
Hard to get it, huh?
Yeah.
Because with the light shining through it,
It's a field artillery scene, isn't it?
it's a man, and woman, and the woman he's got a flat hat on. The woman's got an apron and a long dress, and he's got something in his hand. I don't know if it's a fishing pole or what it is. That's amazing. How do they do that?
Of course, the thing of interest to me was how to get it home intact.
Oh, yeah.
So I scheduled it as an operation.
Come on.
I put on our bulletin board, operation, name of the patient, Stein.
Oh, sure.
Operation
You're
application.
beautiful.
Operation application of plaster cast. So I wrapped it up in sheet wadding and a plaster cast and came home intact, you know.
And it was beautiful.
Anesthetic none.
Anesthetic none. Not until you filled it with something anyway, that's for sure. Oh, that's a beautiful memorabilia. I'm just wondering if you did you bring many things back with you? Come on over here.
I brought home a nylon map of Italy that the parachutists used when they dropped.
Ah.
Yeah. I brought home a swatch of this nylon from one of the parachutes at Salerno, where I told you the girls were dressed in garb. You know, after the parachute landed on one of our tents, knocked down our tent. That's about all. I brought home I got a picture of autographed picture of General Clark.
Did you?
Yeah, that's in the book. You can see that in the book.
Is that Mark Clark?
Mark Clark, yes. Yeah.
Let me ask you another question that I failed to mention before, and Calvin reminded me. Did you ever operate on German soldiers?
Many.
Tell me about that.
Well, the commanding officer of our hospital was Paul Sauer. Paul Sauer from New York City took care of the casualties from the von Hindenburg in 1937 when it burned up, when it was hit by lightning at Lakehurst, New Jersey.
I have a piece of it at home.
Do you really? And that was of
Months
interest.
before I was born.
Now, he was a German by birth, Paul Sauer, and he was very pro-German, but he wasn't pro-Nazi. So this, to me, was of interest that he took more interest, honestly, in the aftercare or the operations on German prisoners than he did of our own. And he would always ask me what I was doing for Hans somebody, you know, after the operation. Was I mobilizing his shoulder quickly enough and things like this, you know. So that was of interest. So I took care of a lot. As a matter of fact, at Anzio, I was getting ready to operate on the head skull of a German prisoner when this bombing took place. The films, the X-rays were not true AP and lateral, so I wanted to be sure and be able to localize a shell fragment that was in this fellow's brain, and I sent him back to X-ray to be re-X-rayed so I could do it more accurately. And then I went back to read the mail, and while I was back reading the mail, the bombs came down, hit him, killed him right there. So,
Oh,
yeah,
my.
yeah. So I never did get a chance to operate, but I operated on many German prisoners. The SS troops, you know, were vicious people. They had these little tattoos on their elbows, you know, it distinguished them from others. Yeah, yeah. Africa Corps. I'm going to sit down again here if you don't mind.
Oh,
Excuse me.
sure. Yeah, like I say, many people you talk to now, their college years were their most important years, or some people who don't go to college, their high school football or their high school senior year. Were those war years the most poignant, the ones that stay in your mind more than others? Or
I suppose so, but I've certainly enjoyed practicing medicine and surgery for 56 years, you know. I think I did around 40,000 cases, surgical cases. Yeah.
Come on.
I did.
Has anybody ever done more? That's
I don't
Ripley's,
know.
believe it or not. Guinness Book of World
I
Records.
hope it's quality as well as quantity. But I helped the old Scotch doctor for about 5,000 cases because I worked for him for 5 years, and counting major and minor surgery, he did about 1,000 cases a year. Yeah.
That's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Well, I'm counting tonsils. For instance, I would go down to
Tonsils count.
I would go down to Keene Valley with him, and it would be nothing to do 12 or 15 tonsils in the morning down there.
Come on.
Did them by the by the family, by the bushel. Yeah.
Somebody.
Everybody got their tonsils out.
When you tell me that, somebody wrote me a letter or an email, and I'm terrible on names, but they said, "Oh, Dr. Silver. I remember him when he came to our house and took my tonsils out on the kitchen table."
Sure. No, I would certainly agree with that. My father used to go all over the North Country operating on people. He and a Dr. Charbonneau from Keysville. Yeah. Doc Charbonneau, the son, I think is also deceased, but my father and Dr. Charbonneau Sr. would go all over the North Country and doing amputations and take out people's appendix and gallbladders and hernias and do all sorts of major general surgery. And then Dr. Charbonneau apparently felt that he was not qualified to be on the staff of a hospital once the Champlain Valley Hospital was built. So he did not want to join the staff. My father did, and again did a lot of simple general surgery. Didn't do some of the complicated stuff that I did later on.
So you were always a surgeon from the beginning. You were
Well, the first
never.
couple of years just to feed my family. I did some house calls. I did some maternity cases. But after the war, I did nothing but general surgery.
Wait, as you were telling me these stories about all these operations, have you stayed in touch with any of the people that you operated on during that war period? Have any of them looked you up to say, "Thanks, Doc, for sewing my arm back on"?
I had a German prisoner write me one time whose leg I'd amputated. Just a general letter. Of course, my associates are all passed on, all deceased. I only have two that I know that are still alive. That is of the surgeons. One is a Dr. Staples, who was the head of orthopedics at Dartmouth, the Hanover Hospital. What's it called? Mary Hitchcock at Hanover. He's still alive, not well. And then my buddy was a dentist by the name of Emerson, and he has advanced Alzheimer's disease. He and I were great buddies because we dug foxholes together. I was 6'1", he was 5'6", and he was willing to dig half the foxhole.
His half, huh? Oh, what a wonderful story. You learned how to bend over, didn't you?
Yeah.
To dig that, get down in that foxhole.
Yeah.
Oh, that's...
We had foxholes at times right inside our tents, when these things were bad.
Did you really?
I remember very vividly going to a little restaurant in France, I think near Epinal, and it was part restaurant and part butcher shop. And I was really the only one who could speak any French at all. I don't speak very fluent French, but I spoke pretty well during the war. So anyway, sometimes these owners would want medical advice. And this woman, I well remember, gave me a bottle of champagne in payment, for services rendered. And of course, we brought the bottle of champagne home in our Jeep. We traveled by Jeep, of course. And put the bottle at the foot of my bedding roll. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, it exploded.
Oh, come on.
And of course, we thought it was something that dropped on us.
My.
And you won't believe it, but we all jumped into our foxholes and put the wooden covers over, stayed there about 15 minutes till we realized it was just an exploding bottle of champagne.
You were really sad because the champagne.
Exactly. Yeah, that was one pleasant memory we had.
Oh,
I remember one other little story. In the same little restaurant, and this French motorcyclist came in with his saddlebags, messages either going to the front or coming back from the front. Ivre, which means drunk in French. He was drunk as he could be. And he pounded on the table, and he asked the girl to bring him some quiche, I think, a liquor anyway. So he drank this thing down, put 100 francs down, and he wanted another one. And he wanted another one. He had 4, I think, and then he staggered out. So I called a little waitress over, and I said to her, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. You're apparently a loyal French individual, civilian, and you've given this fellow 4 glasses of liquor, and he's drunk already when he comes in. She said, Major, she said, I gave him 4 glasses of water. And he didn't know the difference.
Isn't that
Now, that's a true
beautiful?
story.
Oh, that's a great story.
Gave him 4 glasses of water.
And I imagine stories come back to you now,
Things like that come back.
come back to you that you haven't even thought of for,
That's right.
for 50 or 60
That's for
years.
sure. That's true. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's true.
You know what I would really love to do? I'd like to see some of the memorabilia that you have in the other room that you showed us when we came in, and it'll be a good way to wrap up our program.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
Let's do that.
Now this.
All right, tell me what
our
this is.
This is our hospital set up after we were bombed at Anzio. And this is the famous 6th century Benedictine monastery at Casino. You ever remember
Oh, yes,
Casino?
of course.
And I'd say 750 to 1,000 of our planes flew right over us and dropped their bombs right there. And a lot of the small bombs landed in our area. Nobody got hurt. These were from from German fighter planes. They were trying to drop bombs on our bombers. But that's the Monte Cassino there. That's how close we were when we were set up.
Oh, my.
I thought that was of interest.
Okay.
Now this is the exact landing place at Anzio. Right
Oh, this
here.
is a real, now we're talking a real photograph.
That's the exact place where we came in. This area is all mined by the Germans here, you know.
Yeah.
And this is our invasion fleet here.
Have you ever gone back?
No, never have. No.
Never taken trips to back any of the places,
no,
huh?
No, never went
Never
back.
had any
No,
great
I've
desire?
been busy all my life. I didn't.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. And these are a couple of the early articles right here.
Okay.
That could be the first article that she ever put in. I don't know what the date.
1989.
Is that what it says?
Sunday, November 12th,
Yeah,
1989. Paratroopers rescued landing party in Salerno.
Yeah, that's what I was basically telling you.
Oh, yeah.
And there's Emerson, myself, and a foxhole right there.
Oh,
And my picture, I can't see it very well.
I can see it right
in the-
here.
I'm-
The tall man with the big smile.
I'm in the middle. I'm in the middle there.
Yep.
And this is there's my picture there.
Right here in the middle. I
Yeah,
believe
there's
you are,
Emerson, my
right
little
here.
short friend. I pulled him ashore. When he
He's
saved
the
it.
one with the
he was-
foxhole, huh?
He was the short guy. And we were landed in about 5 feet of water, so he was over his head. So I pulled him ashore. That fellow there was Colonel Patterson. He later became president of the American College of Surgeons.
Oh, my.
Yeah, that was my roommate. He died shortly after the war.
Yep.
That fellow's still alive. His name is Friedenberg. That's the little boat we landed on.
Well, these landing craft, these LCAs were made right there in New Orleans. That's why they
Is that so?
That's why they put the D-Day
No, I
Museum
didn't- I
there,
didn't know.
because they were invented in
Yeah.
wooden craft.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the little boat we came in on. And my friend Emerson had a Leica camera, and he was taking some pictures. He said, "Isn't it wonderful to have our fighter protection as we're coming ashore?" And in fact, there were German planes that were strafing us, you know.
Oh, isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And we got within about 5 feet of shore, and the little English lieutenant, this guy here, who was running the boat, I said, "Get the hell out of here. This is another bloody Dunkirk."
Oh, my.
And I got a letter from England not very long ago, and the fellow said it shouldn't have been Dunkirk. It should have been some other little place where the Canadians tried to land, and then they were kicked out.
Oh, my.
Yeah. That's, I think, of interest. If you ever hear this, we had a little
Okay.
water here.
Okay, that's General Clark.
That's autographed. You can't see it there. You can't read it.
Oh, great picture, though.
Yeah.
General Mark Clark. What else have we got here?
Well, this is Eisenhower and Mark Clark. Can you see that, Kelly?
Oh,
Yep, we can
And
see it.
this is our commanding officer. That's Sauer I was telling you about that took care of the
Oh, yes.
Hindenburg. Yeah. That's you see, that's when it's so hot, and he's the guy that put the water towers up.
What a great idea.
Yeah.
What's this color picture up here?
That's a watercolor done again by this Dr. Grantley Taylor. He was this head and neck surgeon from Boston. And he's head of the American Cancer Society. A lot of these people I have were really famous doctors that I would never have had the chance of meeting in my lifetime, you know, being
Wonderful.
a small country surgeon up here. Yeah.
So you could just have memories all over the place.
This is the map. It's on two sides that were given the paratroopers when they landed
Really?
in Italy. Yeah, that's Italy.
Is it on paper? Is that on
It's
paper?
on- I don't know what it's on.
Okay. Almost looked like cloth for a
Yeah,
minute
this is
there.
a story about Anzio there. That's the story that I wrote about Anzio. What's the date on that one, Gordy? Can you see?
Let me get a little closer. November 11th, 1990.
Yeah, see, that was
Really?
one for Helen McLeod. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's about 11 years ago.
That was the worst experience we had there.
Was it really?
Of them all, yeah. Yeah. And landing in southern France, there were a lot of ships that were sank, hit by mines, but we came right along through, nothing touched us at all. I got a sprained ankle during the war playing softball.
Did you really? That's tough.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, look.
This is an aerial of our setup. That's basically what our hospital looked like from the air. That was in someplace, I think maybe Capua in Italy.
In Italy, I see the crosses
Yeah.
on the ground.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this picture with
That's
that.
Dr. Goff. I wrote an article not too long ago about Dr. Goff. Did you read that?
Did, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
A lot of people thought that was a good article.
Oh, my.
Yeah, I never saw him without a cigar in his mouth, excepting in the operating room.
Really?
Yeah. He never lit a cigar in his life.
Never lit him,
Never
I know.
lit him. Yeah.
Oh, that's
That was a
great.
ceremony when Roosevelt died. We were in a little place called Kist in Germany. And they had a little ceremony for him, when Franklin Roosevelt died in April of 1945.
Well, it's interesting you should mention that because a friend of mine, retired school teacher, math teacher at PHS for years, Harold Bates,
I know him.
took a photograph of Hawkins Hall,
Uh-huh.
the old normal school, with the flag at half-mast
Really?
at that same time.
Is that so?
Isn't that
Yeah,
interesting?
Yeah, we had a nice little ceremony there.
Another story about...
Well, this is Grantley Taylor. He's the fellow I was telling you about. That was our chief of surgery.
Yep.
And he was one of my roommates during the war. And as I say, people I met that I've never in this world have ever had a chance to become friendly with,
And he's been dead since 1966.
He died down in the tropics, yeah.
Oh, my.
Yeah, and he died, and they couldn't even embalm his body, so he was buried down there somewhere.
Isn't
He was on a
that-
vacation.
Oh,
yeah.
my.
Yeah.
Look at this memorabilia from 22 years ago.
Yeah, that's from Stonehelm. That's Soper.
Oh,
What's his name?
sure. Oh, look at this.
Yeah, we had a birthday party there.
Oh, my, my,
Yeah,
my.
happy 70th. Yeah.
That's a family. Is this a family group?
This is a
over
great
here?
friend of mine. This fellow is extreme, multi-millionaire. This guy here, John Doheny, and his wife Doris. Isn't she pretty?
Yep.
And that's their children and grandchildren. And they were probably my closest friends for years down in Florida. Yeah.
Now, I told you, if you as we were walking down here, that we just did a couple of television programs with Ardo Monaco, and you say, oh, I know Ardo. I operated on who?
I operate on, I think Ardo and maybe Mrs. Monaco.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
Isn't that neat? Oh, yeah, then it's neat people.
Nothing else of any consequence here.
Well, you got a great flag. Does
Well,
this
it
flag
needs to
have
be-
a history?
Yeah, it's got history. There's a history to it right there now.
Oh, okay. Now, I'm going to try to read this
All right.
with my trifocals here. I'm probably get a whiplash.
All right.
But it's Honorable Clarence E. Kilburn, House of Representatives, Washington, D.C. My dear Congressman Kilburn, this is to certify that the enclosed flag was flown over the Capitol of the United States on July 4th, 1960, the day the 50-star flag became the official flag of our country.
Yeah.
J. George Stewart, the architect of the Capitol. So that's significant. That's of
Yeah.
great interest because, how many songs do we know where we talk about the 48?
Exactly, that's for sure.
And
Yeah.
then it was 49, and
Yeah.
then it was 50.
I've offered this to the Historical Society, but they didn't seem to be interested in it.
Well, it's a nice piece of memorabilia to
Yeah.
have
But-
right
but
here.
I'd be but I'd be more than happy to give it to,
Oh.
any worthy recipient.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, that's basically all we have down here. It's here.
All right, yeah, you got some more photographs.
Yes, yeah.
We
yeah.
said we had a lot of them, but somebody was good enough to put them on a poster for
These
you.
were all put together for my 90th birthday.
Oh, they were?
Yeah,
That was
it was
and
all-
that was a couple of years ago.
That was just about 2 years ago, yes. Yeah.
Have you had your birthday this year?
No, it's 24th
24th?
of May.
Oh, that's coming up.
It's the same as Queen Victoria's birthday. Queen
Oh.
Victoria, 24th of May is my birthday. If we don't have a holiday, we'll all run away.
I love it. Listen, I want to talk about Brother Andre. What's your connection?
Well, I have no great connection with him, except that I knew of him. I'd seen him. Of course, I've been up to visit the shrine. I have one funny little story relative to him because we had a woman from Saranac Lake that came down to have a benign breast tumor removed. And she was terrified of the hospital, terrified of anesthesia, justifiably so. And we ran out of anesthesiologists because Dr. McDonald, who was going to do the surgery, just couldn't persuade her to come in the operating room. So she'd come to various stages of preparation. She might get on the gurney and come into the operating, and then she'd jump off and pack her bags and go back to Saranac Lake. And about the 7th time, she came into the hospital the night before, as she always did, and got in the operating room, got on the table, and of course he was delighted that she was ready now to have her little tumor removed. And she sat up and she said, "I want one more favor." And we said, "What's that?" She said, "Well, I want to see Brother Henri before I have this operation," which meant packing her bag again, you see, and then going back to Montreal. Anyway, the last occasion, I was the anesthesiologist. Of course, I didn't know anything about anesthesia. So I got 2 big, strong orderlies. We got her on the carriage and got her halfway into the operating room when she again lost her nerve. And I had her strapped down, and I had ether underneath the mattress, and I put the mask on her face and dumped the ether in her face and put her to sleep, thinking we'd all be sued, But she was the most grateful patient you ever saw in your life. She thought it was wonderful. That we finally knew how to operate on her.
There are a million stories in the naked city, as they say, and I think 999,000 of them are right here in this little block at 107 Court Street in Plattsburgh. Doctor, I thank you so much for spending a little bit of your busy life with us.
Thanks for putting up with me.
It's just amazing, and I hope you're here for a long time to come and write maybe 2 or 3 more books.
Well, I'm afraid that's the end of the book writing.
Well, you're
one call does it all,
One call does it all. I love it, Doc. Thanks again.
You're very welcome.
Have a great life and a happy birthday next week.
Thanks very much, Gordy.
And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.